Okay, Azra, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you around the world. Welcome to the International Conference Integrated Reconstruction and Post-Trauma Impact on Communities and Socioeconomic Aspects of Recovery. My name is Azra Kshamia, and I'm the chair of the session number 4, titled People-Centered Post-Trauma Reconstruction and the Recovery of Cultural Heritage. I'm an artist and architectural historian, currently associate professor in the Department of Architecture at MIT in Boston, where I also direct the Future Heritage Lab. I will begin with the introduction of this panel. We will have 4 papers, each around 20 minutes, and after that we will have a set of reflections and a discussion with the panelists. So let us start with the introduction. People-centered approaches to the recovery of cultural heritage as a means of addressing societal trauma after a natural disaster and human-made conflict is increasingly gaining traction in the field of heritage conservation. Recent scholarship has questioned the role of governments and preservation bureaucracies to protect cultural heritage on the basis of objectivity, re-evaluating the long-standing assumption that policy-driven conservation can fully be effective in light of massive scale of heritage destruction that occurs in cases of natural catastrophes or as a part of contemporary warfare. The 4 papers presented and discussed in this session today explore the transformative capacity of cultural heritage and its recovery in the process of social healing. Our panelists today will present different case studies of cultural heritage recovery and conservation in response to both natural destruction causes, such as in the cases of earthquakes in Nepal and Albania, and also in response to deliberate destruction of cultural heritage, as in the Balkans, Cambodia, Iraq, and Syria. While the people-centered approaches presented in this session are varied, of course, depending on the different cultural and sociopolitical milieus, we can identify some shared concerns and assumptions. The first shared premise is that cultural heritage is crucial for the overall recovery process after a traumatic experience. The process of restoration and recovery provides the community with a sense of normality, helping it not only to recover from trauma, but also to reestablish a sense of the normal life. Related to this argument is the idea that tangible and intangible heritage are closely linked and they need to be jointly considered in recovery processes. As the immaterial values of people's daily life and their cultural practices revolve around material culture and monuments, the recovery and safeguarding of both tangible and intangible heritage in tandem represents a powerful means of maintaining the vitality of the local community after a traumatic event. Throughout the different case studies, the varied approaches developed by our panelists demonstrate possibilities for capturing and nurturing the social dimensions of community-based values of cultural heritage. The second shared concern of people-centered approaches represented in this panel regards the ethics of conservation and reconstruction. To begin with, the issue of contextuality is foregrounded by all panelists, reminding us that cultural heritage is perceived differently in different cultural milieus, and accordingly, its meanings and values vary in different parts of the world. Hence, we need to consider whose conceptions of conservation are being applied in what context. Are Western approaches really applicable to all sites? What about the local conceptions of heritage conservation as a form of living tradition of knowledge transfer or other ritual forms of, for example, cyclical renewal? Should governments be in charge of these processes, or is this the task of local communities? A common theme throughout the 4 papers is that there is no one-fit-all solution and answer to these questions. Rather, people-centered approaches are contextual and dependent on local traditions and circumstances. Our panelists also point at the various challenges of people-centered approaches. Because of their contextual premise, people-centered approaches necessitate a deep understanding of the local knowledge, materials, and techniques. They also require a nuanced understanding of regional politics. Because these approaches challenge established material-focused methods of conservation, operating beyond conventional funding streams can, of course, also be a challenge. The differences that became apparent to me in the approaches of our panelists are largely conditioned by the causes of the destruction. There is an obvious difference between people-centered heritage recovery processes that are related to destruction based on natural causes versus destruction linked with political agendas, especially when it comes to war and genocide, for which deliberate targeting of heritage is a powerful tool and comes with specific emotional burden. If cultural heritage is such a powerful tool to destroy and divide communities, in which way can it also be seen as a vehicle to restore social life and peaceful coexistence? Finally, all of our panelists are driven by the question, what is actually to be recovered and to what end? Top-down conservation practices tend to favor physical dimensions of artifacts and monuments, neglecting the need to consider underlying social implications. People-centered recovery approaches point at the need to restore not just these material, but also the social values and structures behind physical environments. In light of the massive destructions of cultural heritage in areas of conflict and crisis, this line of argumentation finally leads us to a set of fundamental questions of what actually counts as cultural heritage and who decides what is to be recovered. Institutions, experts, or is it affected communities? Is the restoration of cultural symbols sufficient to carry social healing after war? In what ways can people-centered approaches to cultural heritage conservation contribute to larger socio-political and economic developments after disasters and crises? How does one balance cultural significance versus economic factors? To conclude, the innovative work of our panelists will demonstrate the shortcomings of the established top-down approaches of policy-driven cultural heritage recovery in the context of conflict and crisis. Policy-driven recovery approaches of cultural heritage have only one significant disadvantage to people-centered approaches. They foreground the material value of artifacts over their socially embedded values, which raises various ethical concerns, especially in their applicability in context of conflict. People-centered approaches have the potential to revolutionize the field of heritage conservation through an increased qualitative impact on the human and community scales, and the development of new tools for transdisciplinary research and methods that extend the boundaries of the field. Please join me in welcoming our first panelist, Martina Hasselberger, who I will just introduce her briefly. Martina Hasselberger studied conservation and restoration in Vienna and cultural property protection at Krems. Since 2014, she has been a university assistant and research associate at the Institute of Conservation at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. Since 2019, she has been a dedicated staff member of the UNESCO Chair on the Conservation and Preservation of Tangible Cultural Heritage. Her dissertation is on the preservation of tangible cultural heritage within a living culture. Martina Hasselberger co-authored this paper with Ranjit Khatri from Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust in Nepal, and Gabriela Christ from the Institute of Conservation, University of Applied Arts in Vienna. The paper is titled "The Bigger Picture of Recovery, Conservation Challenges Related to the Living Heritage and Value of Belief Systems in the Preservation and Reconstruction of Cultural Heritage at Patan Durbar Square." Please join me in welcoming Martina. Oh, we have Rohit here. Maybe then I can briefly also introduce Rohit. Rohit Ranjit Khatri is an architect and preservation consultant and Nepal program director of the Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust. His research includes the documentation and study of conservation practices in Nepal, which he also covered in his PhD dissertation. He also implements new architectural projects and is a conservation consultant to the UNESCO World Heritage Center and German Technical Corporation. Please welcome Martina and Rohit.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I will now share my presentation and I hope you can see it well. I would like to thank the Arab Regional Center for World Heritage for organizing this international conference, despite all the obstacles and complications caused by the ongoing pandemic, and for giving us the opportunity to contribute a case study and perspective from Nepal today. It is a pleasure for me to be with you today here and to present on behalf of my co-author, Dr. Ranjit Khatri and Professor Chris. Patan Durbar Square is the urban and cultural center, as well as the functioning core of Patan, one of the former 3 royal cities in the Kathmandu Valley. More than 30 individual built structures of great beauty, as well as artistic and historic significance, are clustered in the square. The architectural ensemble comprises the residence of the former Malla kings, the palace you see here with the multiple courtyards, together with a large grouping of multi-tiered and Sikara-style temples, shrines, pillars, and other monuments dating from the 16th to 18th century. They are primarily built in brick, timber, or stone, reflect the Nepali architectural history characterized by exquisite craftsmanship and artistry in brick, terracotta, stone, timber, and bronze, associated with the local ethnic group of Newars. In Patan, the tangible and intangible cultural heritage are closely linked and related to each other. The living culture is an essential characteristic of Patan and of Nepal more generally. It was also, beside the outstanding architecture itself, a major criterion for the site's inscription on the UNESCO World Heritage List as part of the Kathmandu Valley World Heritage Property, which was the first property in Asia to be listed. Here you see the individual sites and monuments that form this property on the World Heritage List. Situated in a highly earthquake-prone zone, the Kathmandu Valley has been repeatedly affected by seismic activities, claiming victims and causing damage and destruction to housing and built heritage. In 2015, the region was again hit by a devastating earthquake. Beside the humanitarian catastrophe with almost 9,000 deaths and 22,000 injured, the earthquake caused enormous damage to vernacular architecture and cultural property. About 2,900 structures were affected. The built cultural heritage in all 7 World Heritage Monument zones suffered from damage. Acknowledging that cultural heritage is a crucial element in the recovery process, it was considered from the beginning and included in the 23 thematic areas of the post-disaster needs assessment. The monuments in Patan have since then been conserved, recovered, and reconstructed with enormous effort. The Institute of Conservation, together with the Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust, which are collaborating in Patan since 2009, have contributed since the earthquake with financial support from the Austrian government. The conservation and restoration work and strategies, as well as findings of related research, material assessments, technological surveys, are discussed in more detail elsewhere. Just a few of the so far published literature and articles can be seen on this slide. The paper in this postprint of this conference delves more deeply into socioeconomic requirements and decisive factors for recovery, reconstruction, and conservation of cultural heritage, making no claim to be exhaustive, but addressing at least some. They include the long-term commitment of financial support, the availability of craftsmen and other key professionals, the availability of building materials, pre-disaster documentation, comprehensive service and assessment, but also the importance of a local community and the challenges and opportunities related to local beliefs and values, as well as living heritage and associated craftsmanship or traditions in care of heritage. And the latter mentioned will be the focus of this lecture today. By means of selective case studies, their impact and how they've been addressed in Patan is illustrated. At the beginning, I would like to focus on the role of the local community. After the earthquakes, the KVPT, the Trust, initiated the immediate rescue of artifacts. This was only possible with the help of the local community. In Patan, most of the people who live in and around the Durbar Square are local inhabitants whose families have lived there for generations, keeping the monuments in use. These residents are thus easily accessible, and when disaster strikes, these residents are the first to be on site, the first who are available for help when probably emergency responders can't access, and they are the ones who stay at the affected site also when trained responders already leave. It is notable that in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake in Patan, residents proactively started not only to rescue human beings, but also to recover and secure architectural elements like statues, carved wooden elements, and so on. They literally pulled them out of the piles of rubble, kept them safe, and handed them over to the Trust within the following weeks. Some local peoples even rushed to the site to protect artifacts from theft. Within the following days, then the rescue and recovery of works of art continued and was intensified and was mainly carried out by local stakeholders, local community, and the Nepal Army, armed police forces, and the police. Artifacts and decorative components from collapsed temples were manually recovered. The use of heavy machinery was avoided. The salvaged components were documented and subsequently stored in a safe environment as the museum courtyard or temporary storages. Such an immediate response is only possible if the community is aware of the value of their surrounding, and this was the case in Patan, where they volunteered to support, and it was easy to convince them to participate. The Patan Durbar Square, just like the other urban centers in the valley, is an exceptional example of a living heritage too. Living heritage is closely linked to the concept of continuity, meaning the continued or the original function, the continuity of care of the heritage, the continuous evolvement of tangible and intangible heritage, and the continued link to the community, which is an inseparable part of the heritage, creates, utilizes, maintains, and adapts the components of the living heritage. At Patan Durbar Square, this living heritage is perceptible and visible in multiple ways. The built heritage is closely linked and related to the urban, social, cultural, and religious life. Open spaces, courtyards, and temples and monuments, they are all important places for meeting, human interaction, rituals, worship, and important multi-day events like the Chariot Festival you can see here on the middle. And all these cultural practices are more or less practiced and take place as they did in the past. In the aftermath of the earthquakes, this meant that, while restoring or rebuilding, arrangements should be made to implement and continue intangible cultural heritage, as mentioned in the basic guidelines issued by the Nepalese government. This in turn poses not only a risk to humans in terms of structural safety, but also to the affected monuments, which might suffer from further damage. Proper shoring and securing measures proved thus very essential, as fences were sometimes ignored and a complete isolation of an affected heritage was not possible without inhibiting the continuity of the intangible cultural heritage. For example, in the middle you see Krishna temple, which locals continued to enter for worship while conservators and craftsmen were working on the roof. And this claim of the of this continuity caused also restrictions in the setup of workplaces, for example, and sometimes caused interruption of work. For example, on the right-hand side, the Golden Door, the entrance to Patan Museum, here annually a water vessel with a Buddha idol inside, you can see it here in front, is placed in front of the Golden Door and visited by locals and believers. And this practice of intangible heritage had to be considered in the conservation planning and implementation and caused some, let's say, challenges for the conservators working in the back. Also, another form of intangible heritage, namely craftsmanship, has remained alive in the valley and particularly in Patan. Crafts have been decisive in the creation of tangible heritage, but also in the maintenance and preservation. In Nepal, the monuments have traditionally undergone cyclical renewal. It is a concept that has sustained in a region over centuries and involves the replacement or rebuilding of damaged elements and monuments by craftspeople. This concept is considered traditional care to sustain cultural heritage, but can conflict with the so-called authorized heritage discourse, which places more value on things and use and fabric, emphasizing the preservation of deteriorated or damaged original components using conservation techniques. Another aspect that had to be considered is in significance and the importance attributed to material authenticity, religious authenticity, and age value. In the Nepalese context, religious authenticity is much more valued than material authenticity and age. And religious authenticity is in no way depending on a compromised historical or material authenticity. A community leader from Kathmandu stated well that even if the temple was destroyed, the idol of the god is there, and that is more important. This could also be experienced at the 16th century Chanarayan temple at the square, one of the oldest in Patan, which was completely destroyed, but people continued to worship its idol once the place had been cleaned up, the rubble removed, and the puja ritual performed, which you can see here on the image. Another example related to that is the case study of the Harishankara idol. The sculpture stood originally in the eponymous Harishankara temple, which you can see here and which collapsed during the earthquake in 2015. The sculpture was the focal element of worship, and the earthquake not only displaced this masterpiece of statuary, but also caused significant damage to it. You can see it here. The sculpture split in two parts and some smaller parts broke off. The Institute of Conservation team was entrusted with conservation of the sculpture, but the local community and priests refused to endorse the reinstallation of the conserved sculpture at the reconstructed temple, because religious beliefs demand that an idol is complete and intact to be worshipped. A smaller replica of lesser artistic quality was therefore made of the same deity for the community to worship and keep the temple in use. The historic original sculpture had lost its connection to the living community and culture. It has transformed into a piece of art. Nevertheless, it has historic, artistic, and age value. It gives evidence of history. It informs on artistic and technological methods of art production. It enables to study the material and its origin, to understand its history of use and its former treatments. It does need to be preserved as well, and its link to the original place should be also preserved. In the end, after a lot of discussion, mainly done by Rohit Ranjit, both sculptures, the historic and the new one, were installed together in the temple. And here on the right, you see a picture of the day of their installation, when both received offerings because of the installation, but in the future only the replica will be worshipped. Similarly to this belief that idols have to be intact, also the belief of the local community that replacements in a simplified form or without decoration, like an uncarved strut, are expressions of lack of respect and stinginess, has an impact on the treatment of cultural heritage. On the other hand, the use of such simplified, uncarved replacements is a common approach in conservation if the original pattern is no longer discernible, for example, due to a lack of evidence or documentation. And this adheres to the concept minimal intervention, and it is in line with, for example, the Venice Charter recommendation to halt restoration at the point where conjecture begins. Within the reconstruction of the Harishankara temple, which we saw before, a carpenter from Bhaktapur replicated 4 of the 8 mother goddesses based on studies of the temple itself and its repetitive elements, as well as in well-known formulas. Historic evidences were not available, and you can see the process here. All these aforementioned aspects influence and affect recovery, preservation, reconstruction have to be considered. The finally chosen approach in Pachan and successfully applied at various monuments can be described as a tremendous balancing act. It aims to follow international norms and preserve historic fabric layers and pieces. It aims at the continuity of tradition, which is closely connected with the continuity of crafts. An emphasis is placed to use local expertise and collaborate with craftspeople. Traditional materials like mud mortar, brick, and timber are prioritized. Exceptions are made in cases where traditional techniques are inadequate and, for example, the consolidation of a monument can be only achieved by the use of modern techniques for conservation and construction. At the same time, collaboration with national and international preservation experts is sought. They introduce knowledge on preventive conservation, expertise, for example, on reatturing and gluing elements, as there is no traditional Nepalese equivalent to this practice. With that, it is possible to reach a balance between preservation and renewal, because in former times, craftspeople would have considered it mandatory to replace all damaged components, as it is inauspicious to reuse broken pieces. After the earthquake now, particularly, and already before, as the Trust is working in Patan since 1991, it aimed to reuse and preserve as much as possible from the original historic fabric, repair broken parts, and replace only missing elements. In practice, this means some timber pieces are recreated from evidence, for example, photographs being available. Some decorative elements are reproduced after deserved patterns on similar architectural components. And particularly for missing iconographic details, the carpenters fill in the iconographical program based on their knowledge and cultural background in consultation with iconographers and in accordance with the traditional approach. You can see here some examples of elements where we have historic or fabric, original substance, and new replacements made. The same for wood and also stone elements. Here again, a newly carved part and some preserved one. And in doing so, the Trust and the authors, they are aware that they are partly breaking with the Nepalese tradition. But factors, particularly like the scarcity of raw materials, as this wood used for these beams and struts is lacking currently, the shortage of craftspeople also in the valley, and as many are preoccupied with looking after their own homes or to care for them, and also due to a growing appreciation of patina and originality, which appears in the region and goes hand in hand with provisions related to the World Heritage Convention and the operational guidelines, as well as national law. So all these aspects promote the modification and refinement of tradition. For safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage after the disaster, it is decisive to maintain the local community, which is itself a part of this living heritage, and keep the monuments alive. So if their livelihood and employment are secured, it is easier for them to stay. And in Patan, the monuments, and also, for example, the Patan Museum located in the Royal Palace, attract tourists and visitors and make the Durbar Square thus a driver of economy and regional prosperity. The recovery of built heritage thus ensures the continuity of the associated social, cultural, and religious life. And further, As reconstruction and recovery are a long-term, multi-annual undertaking, it is equally important to facilitate and ensure continued cultural activities during reconstruction and recovery, as already mentioned, in order not to lose the thread. In conclusion, I would like to note that this contribution is not intended to be a comprehensive survey of all potential issues, and our intention has been to point out and delve deeper into challenges, obstacles, and advantages for conservation and reconstruction related to local communities and their religious beliefs and practices, as well as the Nepalese tradition of cyclical renewal and craftsmanship. Being aware of the presence of varying frameworks and approaches to conservation in a given environment is crucial. Conservation professionals have to consider conservation norms, but can't ignore the living tradition and culture either, as they relate to the monuments and may well have been the reason for their creation and existence. The challenge in the Nepalese context is to balance the philosophy of conservation and the living culture, which requires compromise to preserve the historic fabrics and material elements alongside religious practice, local beliefs and values, all with the aim of keeping the monuments alive. Thank you very much for your attention, and thanks to the funders and all the people who supported us in this work.
Thank you so much, Martina, for this wonderful presentation. Really inspiring and moving work. Our next presenter panelist is Luna Raja. She's a consultant architect and expert in cultural heritage. She has been working as an architect since 1993 and was involved in various cultural heritage conservation projects in Syria since 2000. She is currently working as executive manager and partner at Architects and Consulting Engineers, a multidisciplinary architectural and engineering consultancy company, and as a coordinator for Museums Without Frontiers. She's member of ICOMOS and OWH. Please join me in welcoming Luna, who will present a paper titled Cultural Heritage, a Gateway for Exiting the Syrian Crisis.
Yes, hello. Thank you for this kind presentation, and I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, is it clear? Yes? Can you see my screen? Yes?
Yes, Luna.
Okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. I would like to thank the Arab Regional Center for World Heritage working to establish new guidance for post-disaster heritage reconstruction via the outcomes of the variable activities and international conferences. I would like to thank in specific Her Excellency Sheikha May bint Mohammed Al Khalifa, Dr. Amra Hadi Mohammadouve, Sheikh Ibrahim Khalifa, Mohammed Zian Bazian, my colleague, Khansa Muqdad, the interpreter of the sessions, and I think in here we have Azar Salam, Mr. Desmond Moyer, the book publisher, and all the team behind the scene and working on this project. Through a complicated relationship between man and environment, the material and immaterial cultural heritage have developed through the ages. This interactive relationship presents substantial contribution in environmental development. Therefore, the people are considered as the center element in reconstructions after crisis in general and in the historic cities and around archaeological sites in specific. Why do we suggest that heritage is the key to exit the crisis? I will go through some points and projects that I had worked on that proves how important cultural heritage is for Syrian and why we consider it as a key element. But first, I would like to highlight an important issue related to cultural heritage in Syria, which is a living heritage that continues to survive from thousands of years. كما أننا ما زلنا نحيا في التراث فالتراث حي فينا. The cultural heritage lives in the minds and hearts of the Syrians. It is who they are and what they do. Each and every Syrian had living it or still live in it for different reasons and from various perspectives according to the person, their beliefs and their roles. We can assure you that each and every Syrian still have love, respect, and appreciation for its cultural heritage. Among the cultural heritage sites in Syria, the majority are a living heritage. The historical centers of the cities of Syria are alive. They are still full of residents, visitors, buyers, worshippers, merchants, artists, tourists, etc. And the development of these cities start from their focal point, the historical center. This is Damascus. We can see the Umayyad Mosque at the middle, and we see the citadel of Damascus, and we see the widespread of the old city of Damascus wall. And this is the city of Aleppo. And I can tell you that before the destruction that happened in Aleppo, all these houses that surround the citadel, the old city of Aleppo, were inhabited. This is Jableh, and we see the amphitheater, the Roman amphitheater in Jableh, and we see the distribution of the city around it. Now, the places of worship, living heritage. As you see above, we have the Umayyad Mosque, where people still go to do prayers, and children play in the ground yard, in the yard. And below we have the Santa Anania to the left. It's the oldest chapel in the world. And to the right below, we have, this is the manifestation of Saint Mary alayhi salam in Deir Sednaya. It is one of the oldest monastery in Syria. And you can see the worshippers are filled the places. These are new photos that assure that the heritage is living. Living heritage, we see the souks. Here we have, to the right, we have the souks of Damascus, Al-Bzouriye, we have Emariye. And to the left now we can see the souks, the restored souks of Aleppo that comes back to life. And we have, of course, the historical domed villages to the north of Syria, and people still live in these places. And now we have the tours also. People, as we did when we go to Aleppo, we took our children to visit the citadel. This is the throne hall of the citadel of Aleppo. And to the right, this is the Syrian Association for Discovery. They had a project called Treasure Hunting, and they do the tour of the city of the old city of Damascus. We can see the door, the eastern door of the Umayyad Mosque, and that was part of the Jupiter Temple 1,000 years ago. 10 years of war and the crisis in Syria had resulted of a painful destruction, not only in the cultural heritage, but in the hearts and minds of its citizens. Lives inside and outside the country, lives inside and outside the country. The conserving, rehabilitating, and reconstructing of its cultural heritage can play a crucial and very helpful role in binding back the society cohesion, again with its force of joining back together the Syrian from all religions, nationalities, and political trends. This was clear from the experiment this was clear from the experiment of Directorate General of Antiquities in Syria when working on preserving the cultural heritage, that all Syrians refuses the theft and destruction of their cultural heritage, and this can be used as a key element in rebuilding bonds and cultural heritage. This is this is view from the main gate of the citadel of Aleppo, and this is a new photo that I took in September 2021. The sabotage targeted the psychological health of the Syrian by destroying the safe place in which they live. He lives, his house, the neighborhood, and the city, and by linking the homeland with pain and death, and losing loved ones. He targeted the historical symbols and cultural heritage in order to destroy the national identity and sense of belonging. It is also sabotage of the human soul because of the religious discrimination that it spreads in an attempt to make the people of the same country fear from each other. These are the souks to the right. These are the souks of Aleppo that were most of it were completely destroyed. And above we can see this is one of the sketchbooks prepared by three sisters, Ghannoum, Kinda, Maya, and Nadine for Sketch for Syria initiative in 2016. We can see that they write, for example, Aleppo, and they draw the citadel, Deir ez-Zor, and they draw the suspended bridge, Palmyra, and they draw the Arc de Triomphe, Homs, the mosque of Khalid ibn al-Walid, and Damascus, the mosque of Umayyad Mosque. Perhaps the most dangerous thing that can happen to a person in his feeling of is his feeling of insecurity in his home in which he lives. Therefore, residential areas were among the areas that were most subjected to bombing and vandalism, causing the exit of their people and displacing them. The issue of demolishing the safe habitat and the historic overlaying urban fabric of ancient cities, which is the ancient dwelling, displacing people from their homes and alleys, intimidating them with insecurity and safety, and planting their memories of the tragedies that happened to them in these areas, and thus most of them will refuse to return to their areas. The high rates of devastation and demolishing among the ancient city centers in Syria were concentrated in the old city of Aleppo, inside and outside the ancient wall. The percentage of destruction in it reached about 75% of the total of the old city, of which 25% were largely destroyed, and this destruction included the ancient buildings and famous historical monuments. In the city of Aleppo, 10% of these monuments have been completely demolished. In addition to these monuments, we find that damages have affected the old historical market, the khans, and the urban fabric of the traditional homes that included several thousands of residents. Deep understanding of the relationship between people and cultural heritage during the crisis, I prepared a questionnaire to be asked during the interviews with a selected variety of Syrian that I did prepare especially for this conference and for the project of the book. Among the people that I had interviewed was my cousin, Nesrine. I'm originally from Aleppo, but I was born in Damascus and I live in Damascus. But Nesrine, she used to live in our grandfather's house and with her parents. She was born and raised in that house, spacious house, built from beautiful carved stone. She was one of the million who were forced to leave their residence because of the dangerous situation of every second. First, she lost her young husband, Abdul Latif, who was shot by a sniper. Then she lost her younger brother, Rida, and finally her youngest cousin, Akram, our cousins. Both were killed. Life became very dangerous where she lives with her 2-year-old daughter. When I asked her about her experience about the living culture heritage that she used to live in it, and about her forced to abandon her life, she replies, this is the translation on the screen, but I'm going to read the text in Arabic. By the way, this is our grandfather house in Aleppo, and this is the situation of it. عند الفقد نتألم ولو كان المفقود على سبيل المثال مجرد دفتر أو قلم. كون الأشياء قد أصبحت في عداد المفقودات كفيل تماماً بمضاعفة قيمتها لدينا بشكل يتجاوز المنطق بعض الأحيان. فكيف والمفقود وطن؟ تقول لم أحلم يوماً بل ولم أفكر حتى بمغادرتي الحي الذي ولدت وترعرعت فيه. ولو أني لم أتزوج لما غادرته أبداً إلى الحي الذي يليه. كان شعوري بالغربة حينها يطغى على كل شعور جميل آخر. لم أكن أعلم بأن هنالك غربة أكبر بانتظاري، بل بانتظارنا جميعاً. عندما بدأت الحرب بدأت بالأحياء التي كنا نقطن فيها. بدأت بشراسة وبشكل لم نألف ولا حتى في أعنف أفلام هوليوود. أصبحنا نشعر بأن الموت تتربص بنا دوائره خلف كل جدار وخلف كل شجرة، بل وخلف كل برعم وزهرة. وكمثل مئات الآلاف من أبناء وطني أصبحنا نرى أن في الهجرة نجاة، خاصة بعد أن باءت جميع محاولاتنا في التنقل ضمن الأحياء بحثا عن الأمان بالفشل. وبالطبع لم يكن قرارا سهلا. كيف سنغادر جنتنا؟ كيف سنودع ذكرياتنا في هذا البيت وفي هذا الحي؟ تلك الأشجار في صحن دارنا لمن سنتركها؟ ما هذه الخيانة؟ لقد عاشت معنا كما عاش معنا أمي وأبي، بل وشهدت أجيالا أكثر مما نعلم في هذا البيت. تلك الدهاليز والأدراج والقناطر مزخرفة، والتفاصيل كافة هل سنخونها برمتها؟ ببساطة هكذا. الخشب قصة عشق، عندما تكون بعض الجدران مغطاة بقاطع الخشبية الصغيرة المزركشة، وعندما تكون الأسقف من الخشب، عندها ستكون هناك علاقة أكيدة لمواد البناء مع تعلقنا وعشقنا للمكان. في بيتنا العربي القديم كان هناك لكل سقف حكاية، فكل سقف يختلف عن الآخر بعدد الأخشاب التي على شكل جذوع أشجار تغطيه، كما تختلف ألوانها ورسومها وأحجارها. لكل سقف حكاية جميلة وشعور أجمل. She had a new life in Turkey. She might came back to Aleppo for visit and maybe to continue its life in her city Aleppo. Still, the orange tree seeds that her passed away younger brother planted in our grandfather's old house had grown in the ruins of the courtyard. She said that he tries a lot to grow something when he was alive, and finally he succeeded. Some people may choose not to come back. The memories are too cruel for them to be remembered. But many others chosen to return despite destruction. To the left, this is a new photo for my sister looking at our grandfather courtyard. One of these people is Abu Ahmed al-Shawwa, who owns a small barbecue restaurant located opposite to the citadel of Aleppo. In 2017, he returned to his shop and started the barbecue in front of it, waiting to be able to raise enough money to restore it. He declares, "This is my place of livelihood, and here I lived, and I want to stay and continue in my city and hometown." I would like to talk very fast about the experiment of the Deja Em during the conflict in Syria to protect the cultural heritage with the local community. In the matter of fact, what they had done is they followed the neutrality, the political neutrality for all of their employees, 2,500 employees, with all of their surrounding. They raised awareness about the importance of cultural heritage and about how we must stop the theft of it if we are with or with any other party or with anybody, or we are inside or outside the borders of so-called states or so on. So these employees had worked hardly to protect and safeguard all these places, and they succeeded in doing that. And I think if they didn't do that, we had lost lots of sites. These are photos for sites in Syria. This is Halabia near Deir ez-Zor. This is Ma'lula, one of the oldest villages in Syria, and they still speak the language of Jesus Christ, the Aramaic language. This is the citadel of Fakhruddin al-Ma'ni Sani in Palmyra, and this is the Roman amphitheater in Palmyra. Sketch for Syria is an initiative that involves a variety of people from Syria and from outside Syria. And it was a global call to architects, artists, and innovative thinkers to imagine post-war reconstruction. The initiative was launched in 2016 by the University of Venice, IUAV, in collaboration with the Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia at the United Nations, UNESCO. I was the co-manager and coordinator and designer for this initiative on behalf of the UNESCO. The analysis, why it is important, because the analysis of the results of the initiative, Sketch for Syria, is the best evidence of the attachment of the Syrians with their heritage, and witnessing that the way out of identity destabilization is through the restoration and rehabilitation of this heritage. It was clear within this initiative that the Syrian attachment to their national cultural heritage, from the 45% of the drawings contained and in the return sketchbooks that explicitly or intentionally refer to cultural heritage. This indicates the extent to which the Syrian is attached to his history, especially within the scientific and cultural community. 12 among 13 of the winning sketchbooks were related to cultural heritage, and what was surprising, that half of the sketchbooks that participated from non-Syrian contains also cultural heritage. I have made a tour of some of these books. As a conclusion, as a result, the preservation, restoration, and rehabilitation of the cultural heritage plays an essential role in restoring national cohesion and promoting a sense of belonging to the place and community, thereby eliminating the sense of threat of existence, and well as giving the human being a sense of continuity and stability by linking him to a heritage with shared values that can contribute to human-centered reconstruction, which is the best solution for reconstruction because it revolves around the human being, which is the basis of the building of the heritage and its accumulation. The return of the safe houses, the rehabilitation of the tangible and intangible cultural heritage, the reconstruction and rehabilitation of historical markets, and in general, the revival of the cultural heritage from its present temporary destruction will revive man and rebuild the interconnected relationship between man and the environment, motivating him to seek the development of the present with deep confidence in identity and belonging, which is the basis of the process of sustainable development over time. I would like to use this platform to call all international, governmental, and civil society bodies and those interested in heritage in all its forms to break the siege imposed on Syria, its history and heritage, and come forward to help in a way that matches their goals. For history does not wait. Thank you for listening and hope to see you all in Syria soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luna Rajab, for this really powerful presentation. We from Bosnia can very much empathize with everything you and your community are going through. And I personally wish you a lot of strength and patience in this ongoing difficult time. Now, to our next presenters, we have the next paper is co-authored by 3 authors, Leila Hadjic, Elena Mamani, Anissa Loja, and I will briefly introduce them. Leila Hadjic is a conservation architect with 18 years of field experience in conservation and management aspects of cultural heritage. Since March 2021, she is no longer with CHWB, but continues to work with cultural heritage in the context of post-disaster situations. Elena Mamani is an architect graduate from the National Technical University of Athens, as has worked for several years as a specialist and director at the Urban Planning Office of Girocastra region. Since 2008, she has been largely engaged in the field of cultural heritage, working on diversity of conservation projects, is currently also head of Cultural Heritage Without Borders in Albania, an independent non-governmental organizations dedicated to preserving tangible and intangible cultural heritage. And Anissa Loja is a graduate from architecture from Polytechnic University in Tirana, and is following a passion that started when she was a child. She is one of the youngest members of the Cultural Heritage Without Borders Albania team and works on coordinating and designing conservation and interpretation measures. The paper is titled Post-Earthquake Recovery of Tower C in Durrës, Albania. Please join me in welcoming Elena.
Thank you very much. I'll try to share my screen. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. So as you said, I'm presenting.
I want to try to do a full screen.
I have a full screen. Yes. Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm representing today actually Cultural Heritage Without Borders Albania, and of course my colleagues who are co-authors in this paper, but also the other colleagues working at CHWB Albania. CHWB is a non-governmental organization that was initially created in 1995 by Swedish professionals struck by the level of intentional destruction of cultural heritage during the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The organization's initial activities were to support reconstruction efforts and professional colleagues in this country. From Bosnia and Herzegovina, CHWB expanded later to Kosovo and throughout the Western Balkans region. Our principle, however, has remained to work with all groups in a given area and to cooperate with local expertise, setting local priorities. As the post-war realities have turned into medium-term social recovery and steadier social and economical development, CHWB also expanded its toolbox, engaging more deeply with the local people and creating long-lasting heritage stewardship programs, encouraging and promoting local entrepreneurs, craftspeople, and artisans, while reinforcing skills, employment, and the sense of responsibility and respect. For us, cultural heritage has become a platform for meaningful inclusion, reinforcing rights and creating dynamism. All these processes are filling gaps and creating potential for local community development. The original Swedish organization is now a family of Albanian, Bosnian, Kosovar, and Swedish CHWB local foundation, which are effectively bringing change at the levels of both national policy and local reality. In this presentation, I will draw on examples from the practice and efforts of CHWB Albania. The organization primarily focuses in 8 areas of work, all contributing to the efforts towards sustainable preservation. Today, I will depict actually 3 of the projects of CHWB Albania, trying to show the ways and methods that our organization is applying in its work. The case studies I will talk today will include the post-earthquake restoration of Tower C in Durrës and the inclusion of local communities in the process of restoration, the creation of regional restoration camps as a platform for inclusion and learning, and the model of traditional building techniques course as a way to stimulate the preservation of traditional methods of repair. In fall 2019, CHWB Albania was hit by a series of earthquakes, with the biggest one that reached the magnitude of 6.4 in November 26. And this was the strongest earthquake recorded in the last decades in Albania. The city of Durrës was the epicenter. The aftermath of the event was like we saw 50 people losing their lives, and a lot of others, tens of thousands of people left without homes. And considerable damage was recorded also on 53 monuments, 23 of which were classified as a high risk, and one of them is the Tower C in Durrës that I will talk today. Tower C is one of the angular towers of the fortification walls in Durrës and is built in 3 key historical phases. From the earliest phase that belongs to the construction campaign of the Emperor Anastasius I in the end of the 4th and beginning of 5th century, the second, the reconstruction efforts after the earthquake of the 13th century, and the last Ottoman period from the 17th century. In the weeks following the earthquake, CHWP Albania was asked by the National Institute for Cultural Heritage to assist in the recovery process for Tower C. The idea was to conduct the operation in 3 phases: emergency stabilization, design of the conservation actions, and implementation of the conservation approach. Many months were spent in understanding the collapse mechanism of the tower. There were conducted a lot of structural and geological tests, but also material analysis in order to be able to understand the tower's behavior before and after the earthquake, but also the other causes of the damage. The conservation proposal project was finalized by the end of December, and also all necessary permits were obtained. While the conservation approach and solutions were being discussed by a wide range of professionals, we were keeping the public informed by publishing details of our progress, of our work in the CHWB social networks. On 21st of May of 2020, when sharing this information about the progress of the work, we also posed an open question. What should be done? What should be the end result for this tower? This question has reached almost 24,000 people. Most of them were citizens of Durrës, and 50 of them decided to share their views. And options were really different. I will read today only 2 of them, actually. And one that are very different with each other. The one from Due, he says, I think it should be reconstructed, but imaginatively, while keeping the style of time it was built. I think that our generation has an obligation to pass on to future generations heritage that is protected, and to think of the fact that when Tower C collapsed, 1,000 years of history collapsed with it. If we reconstruct 1,500 years of history, and I say that this is our obligation. And we have also another different opinion, like the one from Koitari, who says, I think that we have other things to worry about. For example, reintegration and urbanization of the Durrës suburbs should be an urgent priority task. Our roads that are flooding every time it rains, and the works must be done by honest people and not thieves, as usually happens. From a conservation point of view, we are aware that by studying the building mechanism and the way it collapsed and studying its values, we can build a very strong case for the approach we want to follow. However, while hearing all these diverse views from a concerned community, we are aware that we must read the whole process very carefully. The project is now in the last phase, that is the final phase of the implementation of the conservation approach. And we are, however, throughout the whole process, we are very careful in discussing the decisions and reconsidering also all our initial approach, given the new findings in the site and the complexity of the structure. From the beginning of the process, CHWP team understood that independently from the planning phases of the scientific conservation approach, we should also engage the community and local stakeholders and ensure that their voices will be represented. Based on the concept of making conservation process a meeting ground, CHWP has designed the temporary structure that you can see in the left side of the screen, which is built next to the working site. This temporary structure, called Restoration Corners, is open to the public and is serving as an information point for the restoration works on site, but also we are using this structure as a meeting point and exchange, serving educational activities, professional debates, and transparency to the whole process. CHWP has also developed a series of educational games for children dedicated to Tower C, but also 3 other monuments that were destroyed by the earthquake. And this simple collection that we call it Stay on Your Feet is, we are using it to explain through the game to children different interesting aspects from the restoration process and the monument itself. And with these games, we are organizing a lot of heritage ateliers with children from the local communities living around the monuments, as you can see in the photo on the right. CHWB Albania has started its work in Albania since 2007, and one of the longest activities that became very valuable and very well known are the regional restoration camps. The objective of these activities are to use cultural heritage to build relations among young professionals, creating conditions for reconciliations, and to preserve traditional materials and techniques. The regional restoration camps represent a simple training model which started with a few students in the World Heritage Site of Gjirokastra in Albania, and has grown later to multiple sessions in 4 countries in the region with a diverse range of participants. Until now, CHWB Albania has organized 48 regional restoration camps, hosting more than 1,000 participants coming from 32 different countries, including all the countries of the Western Balkan region. Over the courses of 2 weeks, the regional restoration camps participants follow a schedule that combines the theory, but also hands-on restoration work on historical monuments in Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, and Serbia. And each intervention actually is intended to directly help the local residents and the owner of the monuments by applying traditional materials and techniques to the restoration of their houses, but also providing to them new ways of understanding, of interpreting cultural heritage, but also revitalizing the buildings that they own. Lectures are conducted by professional conservators and professors in the field, and the practical works are guided by master craftspeople who teaches the correct techniques and ensures that the restoration works are done with the highest quality. In the beginning, it was very difficult or even impossible actually to convince people to travel from other countries in the region. For example, to convince people from Serbia attending in an activity in Kosovo or vice versa. However, the training point in Albania was suggested as a neutral ground since Albania was not implicated in the Yugoslav wars. People of all backgrounds could gather there and feel that they were on an equal footing with their restoration work, creating a platform for peace building on a person-to-person basis. The third example has to do with vocational training on traditional building techniques and materials. Actually, in Albania, the physical conservation has a long history and has started since 1960s with the first cities like Gjirokastra and Berat proclaimed as a museum cities. However, in 1967, there was a vast campaign for destruction of religious heritage in the country. Despite this highly aggressive approach as part of the communist regime back then, there were some professionals like Gani Strazimiri, who he also was the head of the Institute of Monuments of Protection, who organized professionals in the field and initiated the creation of a system for protection of heritage monuments in the country. The former regime made also an effort to safeguard the knowledge on traditional materials and techniques. And in each local unit, there was a group of skilled craftspeople that were working every day on the maintenance and preservation of the historical monuments. And these were called heritage ateliers. And they were actually functioning also as schools for young apprentices who wanted to learn and work on the maintenance and restoration of the historical buildings. However, the last couple of decades, the old masters, craftspersons, and apprentices were no longer required, and their skills were not utilized. While working with a local conservation company in restoration works in one of the monuments in Girocastra, one day we going to the site, we found one of these old craftspeople placing his stamp on the timber and drawing actually these semicircles in order to make the form for them, this lattice of wood to be carved and to be placed in the ceiling of the building. When we asked him what he is doing, he said that this is how he learned to do this since he was 13 years old young boy in these heritage ateliers in Girocastra. This conversation actually served as an initial trigger for CHWB to start its effort into building a program where master craftspeople like Agron would be needed and able to transfer their skills to the younger generation. It took us several years actually to build such a program that finally started in 2016. We created a full training curriculum that was developed and approved actually and recognized in a national level, which means that the National Centers for Vocational Trainings in Albania can utilize this program through their institutions. This program has become national. We were able to implement 5 modules with a length of 6 months that were conducted in 3 different cities, historical cities in Albania. During these training programs, there were like 250 master craftspersons and apprentices certified. And the most important aspect of these trainings is that thanks to the cooperation with the Ministry of Culture and the National Institute for Cultural Heritage, the conservation companies that are allowed to do conservation works in Albania can only obtain and keep the conservation licenses if they employ these certified craftspeople. Trying to draw up some lines on what are our ways forward, I can say that we will continue to stay on the grounds and continue the hands-on work with restoration. We will try to develop sustainable practices in the future and adjust to systematic change. We will try to be professional and fact-based, and our work to be fact-based and to communicate our work to the communities and all the stakeholders. And we will try to stay professional and conversational. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Helena, for the wonderful presentation. It's amazing also that everyone is really keeping well in time. So congrats to all of you to keeping your presentations condensed and on time. So we are coming to our final paper in the session by Bénédicte de Montleur. Bénédicte de Montleur is the president and CEO of the World Monuments Fund, a private non-profit organization dedicated to cultural heritage preservation around the world. Prior to joining WMF, Montleur spent 2 decades working as a senior diplomat for France in positions including Deputy Assistant Secretary in North Africa and UN Security Council negotiator on Africa and the Middle East. Her paper is entitled World Monuments Fund, Lessons from the Field, Heritage Recovery in Post-Crisis Areas. Please welcome Bénédicte de Montleur.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bénédicte de Montleur, President and CEO of our Monuments Fund. I'm delighted to be here with you for this very important conference. I'm sorry I couldn't be here live because, as you know, the travel ban was lifted just yesterday in the US, and we have our whole international team who traveled to be able to exchange for a full week about our upcoming watch projects. but I'm still very happy to be sharing with you some of the things we have learned over the past 55 years at World Monuments Fund about post-conflict recovery. So I'm going to share my screen. So today I'm going to first tell you about WMF and post-crisis heritage recovery in general. Then I will walk you through the example of our work at Angkor. Then I will zoom out and talk about the lessons we've learned from our different sites in general, and then talk about the challenges for the future. So first, let me tell you a few words about World Monuments Fund. So World Monuments Fund was created 55 years ago to safeguard irreplaceable heritage and to work with communities all around the world to do so. Since then, we've safeguarded 700 sites in more than 100 countries. And we have affiliates in 5 different countries, so in Peru, in India, in the UK, in Spain, and Portugal. Our work in post-crisis area has ramped up in the 1980s. We worked first in Eastern Europe and in the Balkans, and we funded publications and lectures in the region to discuss about the importance of heritage work in reconnecting communities with their history, their memory, and their identity. Then we stepping from our work in Eastern Europe, we pretty quickly started working at Angkor Archaeological Park that was itself recovering from a period of very dramatic crisis. And I think Angkor today is one of WMF's most successful examples of post-crisis recovery. Since then, our work in post-crisis has developed all over the world. We are very active at the moment in Iraq and in Yemen, just to give you 2 examples. I think if we have 2 main lessons that we've learned from these experiences is that 1, there is no one-size-fits-all approach that we have to adapt to every place where we work. And second is that community engagement and capacity building are central. So one of the best examples of this is the work at Angkor Archaeological Park. So there we worked at Angkor, we started working at Angkor in 1989, right after the fall of the Khmer Rouge regime. And the main situation there was that there were some big conservation capacity gaps that had arisen from the conflict. Angkor at that time was a perfect example of that kind of conservation capacity gap that you find in many post-crisis areas. Conservators had left, or many of them had unfortunately perished. And there was some rampant looting happening there. So how did we act there? First, we conducted an initial assessment at the site to develop conservation recommendation. Then we started building a conservation project in tandem with capacity building trainings for a local team. And we developed a long-term vision to return stewardship of the site to Cambodians, which is, as we all know, in the conservation field, not only crucial, but it takes a long time. So we identify local partners through stakeholder mapping, reviewing the various teams and individuals already involved at work at Angkor. These steps were critical in establishing our office in Cambodia and committing to a long-term vision conservation with far-reaching outcomes. So here it is, our long-term, this is the team with whom we started working there. Of course, now so many teams have been working at Angkor. There are some exceptional professionals there. The Cambodian authorities are extremely well organized. There are some very strong structures of coordination. So we are very, very happy that we participated in that effort led by the Cambodians themselves. So since then, we have trained more than 100, like we now employ 100 people. We have trained many more, and we are really happy that our team is very much Cambodian led. So I think this is one of the most successful example for WMF working in post-crisis recovery. And there is a lot to be learned, I think, by all of us internationally from Encore, because so many teams have been working them at this extraordinary site. So let me now talk about our other lessons from the past. So what are the things that we think should be done anytime we find ourselves in a post-conflict situation? So the first one is to find strong local partners. And sometimes this is the most difficult in a country shattered by war, where civil society is struggling, has been disorganized. So here you have a picture of the National Museum at the old city of Taiz in Yemen after the conservation of the facade. So here, like, it's the best example of how we work relying on our local partner, because our international team cannot access Yemen. So I think that's the most extreme example of us really relying completely on the General Organization of Antiquities and Museum, GOAM. And what we do is that we do remote training with our Yemeni partners. So we did some remote training in Kuwait and then in Cairo. And then, of course, with the new technologies, including the one we are using right now, we can do a lot as well remotely. But having a partner is key, a strong partner. Second, what we think is that it's really important to promote a holistic and inclusive approach to heritage recovery. I think the tendency in a post-crisis situation is to immediately try to preserve and restore the most emblematic sites, which is, of course, very important. But I think it's also very important to look at heritage sites from minorities that have been, especially if they have been targeted during the conflict. So here you have a picture of the Mam Rashan shrine that is a Yazidi shrine that was destroyed by ISIS in 2014. So in Iraq, WMF works not only at Babylon and Mosul, but also with the Yazidi community. And I think it's really important for the inclusiveness of the process and for every fragment of the population to feel recognized, to feel empowered, and to feel they are part of this recovery effort. So another one important thing is to try to select sites with potential for economic impact. People have, like, in a post-conflict situation, very often people need to work, people need to live, people need to find the means to support their family and their daily living. So heritage can obviously contribute in this. So here it's, and I'm not talking about conflict only, but about crisis in general. So for instance, here you have a picture of a site in Japan that we worked on after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami that devastated, as we all know, the whole northeast coast of Japan. And so obviously the national government prioritized the recovery of bigger national sites. And what we tried to do is to find some local sites that were less maybe prioritized and that's had some potential, some economic potential, and that could help jumpstart the local economy. We totally believe in the transformative power of heritage and the economic power of heritage, and we need to choose sites that will bring some immediate impact to the community as well as some long-term impact. So this was one of the focuses of our work in Japan. So here you have another picture of it. Okay, so let me talk now about the ongoing challenges for the future. So I think that goes almost without saying, but the main challenge is sustainability in all its different dimensions. So first, we need to ensure capacity building, especially for us as an organization. One Monument Fund doesn't own any site. We come for a few years, sometimes 2 years, sometimes 20 years. It really depends on the nature of the project. But we always work with a local partner, and we always live at one point. So we need to ensure that the knowledge is shared and that we do a lot of capacity building so that the stewardship of the site is guaranteed. So this is one of the main things. At most of our emblematic and signature projects, we have some capacity building programs, but as we all know, these take time and resources, and it's an investment that we should really always try to do. A second difficulty is, or challenge, is record keeping and information sharing. It's very important throughout the work to keep track of the successes and failures and to share the lessons learned with sister organizations. It's very important for the stewarding of the site itself that they keep good archive and that they are not lost, especially when we as an organization and the project. But I think it's important also for the field in general so that we can share what we've learned, and especially solutions when they are replicable. Funding, as we all know, funding is key. Conservation is not a cheap endeavor. Very often it's very costly, and also it's long-term. And what we witness is that very often after a crisis, be it an earthquake or conflict, there is a lot of media coverage, a lot of international attention. And so it's easier to get funding than when we are 20 years after the crisis. So that is something that I guess we are all working on, is how to ensure that sites continue to have sustainable income in the long term and that they don't go into disrepair. And finally, we need to prepare for future action. Very often after a crisis, we need to do some immediate assessment, some immediate stabilization. So that's why we need to be ready to have some protocols in place to intervene in post-conflict situation and to have the necessary funding in place. So that's why we've developed our crisis response protocol, and we have a crisis response fund that allow us to intervene quickly on sites. Because the quicker we start, the better it is, even if post-conflict post-crisis recovery is long-term. So these are the main lessons we've learned over the past 55 years, and I would say the past 30 years especially. And we are looking forward to work with all our partners in the field to continue develop our experience and to develop solutions to address even better these types of situations, because we think that cultural heritage can definitely make a difference in this kind of post-crisis situation. Heritage is everywhere around us, and very often this is one of the first ways for people to rebuild after a crisis. So I think the work that we all do in this conference is absolutely crucial, and I'm looking forward to exchanging more with you. Thank you.
Beautiful final words from Bénédicte Montleur. We have come to the end of our session and to the final part, which includes reflections by Saima Iqbal from Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, Kashmir's chapter, Nadia Hashimi, writer, and Luisa De Marco, Senior Advisor at ICOMOS. Please join us for the session of reflections. Shall we start with Saima?
Thank you, Azra, and thank you, Amra, for giving me the opportunity to share a platform with you all. I come from Kashmir, and if anyone amongst you has heard the name of this place, we are, I think, living the longest, a protracted conflict. We are one of the places which is the longest history of conflict with presumably no end in sight and no solutions yet. And although I personally am a conservation practitioner and I mostly work with restoration of buildings and other forms of cultural heritage, I do not yet have a direct or hands-on experience with post-conflict rehabilitation. While I do have some experience in post-disaster rehabilitation, reflecting on all the presentations that I've seen, which was so illustrative and so informative, I would like to, touch upon the issue of the spirit of the place, which I feel is at times lost, or at times probably, it does take a lot of time for the place to regain its original spirit or feel. So quoting from one of the examples that which is very close to my heart and which is very close to, I think, most of the Kashmiris that have experienced this event, is a 1995 event that Kashmir is actually a very spiritual place. It is known for its Sufi spirituality. So therefore, khankas, which are places of congregation or meditation, they were for Sufi saints, and now also the people are greatly revered. So we have a number of khankas which are built in commemoration of these Sufi saints who traveled from Central Asia into Kashmir, and also helped spread of the Sufi type of Islam. So these khankas are very, very important cultural symbols for Kashmir. Unfortunately, in 1995, one of the Sufi shrines, and I must add here that all these shrines have very monumental wooden typology. They are very huge pagoda style buildings. I wish I could share some of the images with you. And in 1995, one of the most important shrines, which was dedicated to a patron saint of Kashmir, Sheikh Nuruddin Wali, was gutted down, was burned as a result of arson. So what had happened was, in 1995, Kashmir, the internal militancy, or as Kashmiris, some of the Kashmiris would want to say, their resistance to occupation, was at its peak. And because these shrines are very colossal, very huge, they also, because they have religious significance, probably the militants thought it is the safest place for them to take abode, take shelter. And I think about 20 odd militants with all their, arsenal, with all their ammunition, they went into the shrine and they hid themselves there. And a long sustained encounter took place throughout the night, I think over the course of a week. And finally, the security forces, the government security forces, could not, were not able to bring the militants out or, ask them to surrender. So what happened is that they were left with no choice but to burn down the very beautiful, very monumental building. And when that, timber building that got burned, with it took the entire neighborhood, because the structure was so colossal, so big. So the fire, the flames engulfed the entire village. And with that, we lost about 1,000 years of history and 1,000 years of spirit of that place. And this shrine was not only very important for the Muslims of the place, but it was revered by the Sikhs, by the Hindus, and all, because Sheikh Nuruddin Wali is known to be the patron saint of Kashmir, and he's said to, watch over Kashmir and look after its well-being. So it was a big shocker, I think, for international community wasn't very much in contact with Kashmir at the time, I think, but it was a big, big, big shocker for the society at large, for Kashmiri people, because something that they found solace in, something in the environment of militancy they found comfort in, was suddenly gone, and the entire neighborhood was finished. some years down the line, the government felt responsible for gutting down the balloon, for being responsible for, losing this place of heritage. They decided to rebuild the monument, the structure, and they invited proposals from various architects. And I've heard, because I was still an architecture student at the time, I've heard that they sent many architects to Central Asia to study the architecture, not understanding that actually the Kashmiri Khankas are very indigenous. They do have influences from other parts of the Central Asian, the Silk Route, but they are very indigenous. They are built in a very vernacular style. And they turned up, the architect who was selected was ended up making a very contemporary concrete building. Did not much, to my knowledge, did not involve the community. And over the years, so the whole spirit or the feel of the place was lost. And even today, when people write about the environment of the place, they still feel sad that the traditional architecture is lost, the traditional feel of that place is lost. So for me, I think this is a very, very important question as to, especially looking at Martina's presentation. Although all the conservation efforts are very well informed, they are carried out with the best of intentions. They are, a lot of community engagement and local artisans are involved, but how much do they feel? Because at the end of the day, it is very subjective. Conservation is very subjective. We end up making decisions which rely a lot on compromises. How much do you feel you will be able to, or you have been able to restore the intangible feel of that place, of the Darbar, Kathmandu's Darbar, what do you call it? The Darbar hall, or what is it called? I'm sorry.
Square.
Yeah. The Darbar Square. Sorry. Yeah. And regarding Luna's Rajab's presentation is very evocative, and I personally, and we collectively as humanity, several times we feel like we've failed as humanity, when we look at Syria even today, and what has happened to not just its cultural heritage, but to the people, to the community, and how much, migration to foreign lands is something which we feel is a privilege. It is a choice for some of us. We feel we don't fit in, or we want to look for better opportunities, and we move away to better countries or other countries which give us better opportunities. But here Syrians are forced to migrate, leaving behind the spaces that they were attached to, that they felt so connected with. So that is something which I hope nobody has to experience. So that is my take on the presentations. Brilliant, very illustrative, very, very informative presentations. My question to Martina, I don't know, this is a reflections bit, but I don't know if somebody will be able to answer this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Saima. I was informed that Nadia Hashimi unfortunately had a personal emergency and will not be able to join this part of the session. But I do want to read a quick note that she sent us regarding the papers, which remind her of similar findings and challenges in her work. She says, I cannot emphasize enough the role of long-term planning engagement in heritage recovery and trauma recovery processes. Oftentimes, the projects we got in the heritage sector of Afghanistan was short-term, 6 to 9 months. It took us 3 projects to build elementary skills in conservation, museum management, and pest control. Connecting people with a history and shared identity for peace, stability, and economic prosperity is what is needed in Afghanistan, but I could not take donors to invest in long-term projects to sustain impacts and ensure continuity. I wish you and everyone else good luck and look forward to participating and collaborating in the future. So this is I think an important dimension she's bringing in on the kind of long-term duration of these approaches, and also securing funding and international support for them. And this is a good segue also to Luisa De Marco's comment. I would ask you to please follow up on this.
Thank you, Azra. Thank you for this invitation. I'm very happy to see many faces that I know and with whom I've worked. I've been working with Lachlan, Amra, Trevor, Zaki, and Marie-Laure on the Reconstruction project by ICOMOS and ICROM case studies. And some of the topics that have been raised here resonate in me and our efforts, and also see again and to see the reflection going on from participants in our case study project, which is very interesting to listen how the thinking has evolved about case studies. So I think these issues of the lesson learned that has been raised today is very important. I think we have a lesson that we can learn about also on the topic. The topic is people-centered recovery today. And it was for me very interesting to hear, well, often theoretically there is kind of opposed. Either there is the expert, institutional, driven, centered conservation or recovery, either there is the people-centered conservation and recovery. I think from the case studies today, we have listened, actually we have seen a different way where the how to say, the reality is more complex and more nuanced. Martina Hasselberger was presenting her case study about Durbar Square, concluding that all the process in a way has somehow hybridized the way in which the local people have approached also their heritage. So there has been a contamination of the expert in a way, but on the other hand, also the legislation, the system, the institutional framework has somehow also brought the people, the community to appreciate what could be the patina of time, which is very much an expert thing. And for me, it was very interesting to hear about how these encounters between expert, institution, donors, and local communities and craftsmen have actually evolved and built something new, not only physically, but in an understanding of the heritage. And was very interesting for me listening to Luna Rajab presentation, because we had there a presentation from an expert, but also as a person with her own emotions, family ties, personal experience. So seeing the experts as a person as well, for me, I think it's very, in a way, it's very important. And see how the reality, in fact, is less, black and white, much more nuanced in a way in which we develop this recovery. Even if it is people-centered, there is a role for experts, there is a role for institutions. I would like to go back a little bit to the issues of lesson learned. We have discussed a lot today about lesson learned. I think it's very interesting. This is the key point, but in a way, it's also interesting to see how communities or how society themselves learn from their own traumatic experience and how they have been able to cope with that and to overcome, partially, totally, to recover from them. I think it's important in the sense that the lesson learning, in fact, is not a given. There should be a desire to learn lesson. There should be an intention, some intention to learn, but also conditions that allow for this to happen. And in that sense, I would like simply briefly touch upon a case which was mentioned yesterday by Lachlan. It was the case of the Cathedral of Venzone. I don't want to focus on that cathedral particularly, but on the whole process. It was interesting for me to see how, in fact, there has been an effort, and this was an institutional effort, to rethink and to reflect after 40 years of this recovery. So in 2016, after it was in 1976 when it happened, the earthquake, and hit a very large part of the Friuli region, the effort that has been made in 2016 was interesting because it was not a celebration, but has been a number of events covering different facets of the recovery. And it was very interesting to see and to understand, to learn, for instance, that there were elements that were like micro stories that could be traced, like triggered, for instance, by the intervention of Venzone, on Venzone Duomo, which again was a combination of highly qualified expertise and scientific rigor and technology on one side, combined with the implication and involvement of local community members and traditional practices. So again, another form of hybridization, if you wish. On the other hand, this also triggered capacity building and triggered interest from the youngsters that were involved in the process to undertake studies that were related to heritage. So it, in a way, changed their lives, this experience. And other aspects that are interesting in that experience were more strategic level, at a more strategic level. So, for instance, the establishment of the university in the city of Udine, which has been triggered by this is very Italian, community-led interest, but there was a need for an institutional undertaking and response to embrace this interest, this need, strategic for the future of the region. And also the way in which the experience of the earthquake has been presented in a museum, recently developed museum in Venzone itself, where there is a story that is not only the story of the experience of the people, but also the way in which the community and the society at large has been able to establish a sort of form of governance of the recovery. It was very interesting to see the different multiple layers from the contribution of the local actors, but also with the strong ties with the central government. So this multi-layered response, and to me, very interesting, the effort that the institution have done in 2006 to make an overall appraisal of this experience and to see which were the lessons that were learned. And not only the lessons that were learned, but what the society from Friuli, the Friuli people have become over 40 years in the recovery process. So how much this event has shaped the society and the way in which evolved and developed. And it was interesting to see the effort to, in a way, not memorialize, but to keep alive and to transmit to the generation of the people that didn't experience the earthquake. 40 years ago means a lot of young people have no idea what happened, didn't experience this themselves. So this is part of the process that I think yesterday Lachlan was mentioning about shaping the future, transmitting the past in a living form. So even the experience of the recovery becomes, and it can become, an inheritance for a society, for a group of people. So I think it's interesting, this experience, in terms of how a society has been able to reflect upon its own experience. And to me, it's important, this type of things, in terms of how the institutions, we are basically here, there are representatives of institutions at different scales, different level, how these institutions understand what are the conditions that would be necessary to have or would be enable and facilitate this self-reflection over time by the communities that have been hit by traumatic events. It's important to recover, but it's also, I think, important to be able, at different point in time, understand and reflect upon the process. What have we come across and what we have become through this process? So no concluding remarks, but perhaps some reflection that each representative of a different institution can have about how we enable lesson learning, not only from other cases, but from our own experiences. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak in this very important conference.
Thank you very much, Luisa De Marco. Now I would like to open up for some questions, maybe from and between the panelists themselves, our conference organizers, and the audience. If anyone would like to share a reflection or a question, you can do so either.
I think somewhere I'd like to add, I remember in Elena's presentation, she talked about community engagement, where she had 2 points of views. One was that one gentleman wanted a total reconstruction because he thought with the reconstruction or with the rehabilitation, they will be able to revive the 1,000 years old memory, which they so connect with. And then there was the other point of view, which said, no, this is not so important as development works. The roads are always flooded, they're always washed away, we need development work. So these conflicting, you know, as a conservation practitioner, I have had the experience of having conflicting viewpoints from communities. So therefore, I don't know how much of a community engagement and to what level and to what should the approaches be when you're trying to inform your conservation process, because you will always have differing views. And one case in example is on the reconstruction of another shrine which got gutted accidentally. And when we were trying to prepare its recovery proposal, we engage a lot with the local community, the Waqf board, and obviously the users. They did not want us to, recover the salvage material, the burnt columns that could have been repaired, just like Rohit and Martina showed us. They did not want. They said, you guys are trying to save money, and you people are trying to save money on using salvage materials, and you're not going to give us a new building. So they were some of the, sections of the society or the community were hell-bent on having, a replica of the older structure, but built in a more contemporary way, not using traditional knowledge. So I don't know, this is always a conflict for me when we are engaging too much with the community. What should the approach be? And how much of community engagement is so much? Thank you.
Can I have on this?
Yes, please, Rohit.
Yeah, this is not easy. Like what we are doing also is, of course, we need to involve community because the monuments are used by them. In a way, even I live there, I have two roles, two faces. One is how to save and how to conserve the fabrics. And also simultaneously, I have to think about, as a local, the intangible heritage, how to keep the intangible heritage. So most of the time, the tough job is when we try to save the salvage pieces. As Saima said, no one in the community. Everybody wants to have a new one. We are living in the Asian culture. It's different than the Western. So there is a big gap between East and West. So somehow the Western culture is saving the fabric. And also, the difference between the East and West is, in our context, still community plays the big role for maintaining, for using all these things. But if you see the Western culture, even the monuments are used, most of them are as a museum, even the monuments are used, they are managed by the government. So there is no role, I feel, the community involvement. The people come there to worship or pray or whatever, but they don't have any role doing any conservation or looking after the fabric. But in our context, it's completely different. the monuments, the temples are still used in same way as when it was originally built. The use has been changed. So this is why, the intangible heritage we feel very important. If there is no intangible heritage, these monuments will be also considered as a dead monument. And as a conservation architect, not only preserving the tangible heritage, we need to also keep going both. So the slide which we saw about the small replica of the same image in the temple, people don't want to have the original image. They are protesting, they are requesting us to, well, don't put it here, you take it to the museum. The thing was, it was very difficult to convince them. It took a long time, and I spent always more time to talking to the people than doing my work. And most of the time, it takes a long time to convince them. And finally, slowly they come to the track. And even when we're using all the salvage, it was not easy. It's the same issue. I think it's not only Nepal and India, is more like Asian culture. So we don't believe on the historic patina. We believe on the new thing. We believe on the rather than repairing, we believe making new one. And also craftsmen, they don't feel comfortable to repair the old one. They think like, we know how to do that. Why we should repair the other piece? Why we should, keeping those old pieces? We can make better than that. I mean, they might make better than that, but it's not history. That's the issue.
Yes, Luna.
Let me just reflect on this point. From my personal experience, especially now for what's happening in Syria, even before. Now, for example, as you see that we have souks that are full of people, and the merchants, it's not, for them, it's their work. It's the way that they gain money to live. It's not a cultural heritage, it's a living heritage, but for them, it's work. So when an incident or a fire happens and they want to gain back their places, they cannot really wait for the directorate of the old city to come and tell them exactly what are the way of restoring and replacing the missing parts and so on. They want to do things very fast. As fast as possible to continue their work, because they will be without work if they don't do the work fast. And sometimes the governmental bodies became, they came on the way for them to work faster. Otherwise, they need really lots of money to move faster. And this has really happened in some of the incidents in Damascus and now in Aleppo. They are doing their best. All the organizations and the governmental bodies doing their best to do the work as it should be done internationally, to preserve the heritage, to preserve the work. But I mean, sometimes personally, because I work a lot with the local communities and with the NGOs, so I can see that it is very hard for them to really wait our ideas as expert and our expertise to hold on their lives, their homes, their work, and continue later on. So sometimes I work as a devil advocate for this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Luna. Wonder if this is not really sure this is an issue of kind of Western versus other parts of the world. I mean, we have been dealing with similar dilemmas in Bosnia after the destruction, and kind of where the community hurries up to reuse the ancient stones of the mosques to reconstruct as soon as possible, because this is really also about the emotional state and kind of coming to terms what happened and repairing as quickly as possible is part of this process, I believe. Any other thoughts from our panelists, reflectors? I think we are quite good in time. We have actually reached the end of our sessions. I thank you all for participating, sharing your amazing work with us, and please keep doing so. You are doing such meaningful and important work, and I'm very excited to have met you and hope to collaborate with you in the future. Thank you, Amra Hajmuhamedovic, so much for also bringing many of us together, and special thanks, of course, to the conference organizers and funders for making all of this possible. I'll see you in the next session. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Azra, for the moderation of the session. Thank you all again for your contribution and your insightful presentation and discussion. Take care. We will see you tomorrow in the morning at the same hour. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.